The wind carved through Devil's Canyon like a blade through leather, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something that made Samuel Creek's weathered hands tighten on his horse's reins. The old cabin sat hunched against the canyon wall, its windows dark as dead eyes, smoke threading from the chimney like a ghost's final breath. He'd been riding hard for 3 days, following the cryptic telegram that had reached him in Tombstone. Samuel, come quick. Cabin by Devil's Canyon. Don't trust anyone. Thomas. His brother's handwriting, unmistakable despite the urgency that had made the letters lean and sharp. Thomas, who'd vanished 2 months ago without explanation, leaving behind only debts and whispered rumors in the saloons of Prescott. Samuel had searched every trail, every hideout, every place a man might go to ground, but Thomas had disappeared as completely as morning mist. Now this Samuel, dismounted 50 yards from the cabin, his boots silent on the hard-packed earth. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the soft whisper of wind through the canyon walls. No horses in the corral, no movement behind the windows, yet smoke rose from the chimney, and something, instinct perhaps, or the accumulated wisdom of 34 years in hard country, told him he wasn't alone. He approached the door with the careful steps of a man who'd learned that hasty movement often led to early graves. The wood was weathered gray, scarred by wind and time, with a heavy iron latch that hung slightly open. As his hand moved toward it, a voice stopped him cold. "Don't open that door." The words came soft as silk, urgent as prayer, from somewhere to his left. Samuel turned slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the Colt at his hip, but what he saw made him freeze. A woman stood pressed against the cabin's eastern wall, half hidden in the shadow cast by the overhanging roof. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair that caught the late afternoon light like spun copper and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her dress was simple calico, faded blue with small white flowers, but it had been mended carefully, lovingly. She held herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned to make the best of whatever hand life dealt. "Ma'am," Samuel kept his voice low, non-threatening. "I'm looking for my brother, Thomas Creek. You seen him?" Something flickered across her face. Recognition, fear, something else he couldn't name. She glanced toward the door, then back at him, and he saw her hands trembling slightly. "You're Samuel," she said, and it wasn't a question. "He said you'd come, said you always came when he called." "Where is he?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on some point beyond his shoulder. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of secrets too heavy for one person to bear. "Inside, but if you open that door, everything changes. Everything." She looked at him directly then, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tight. "He told me about you, about how you always tried to save him, even when he didn't deserve saving." Samuel studied her face, looking for lies, for deception, for whatever game Thomas might be playing now, but all he saw was truth, raw and painful as an open wound. "What's your name?" "Elena." The name came soft as a whisper. "Elena Vasquez." "And what are you to my brother, Elena Vasquez?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "His wife." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. Thomas, married? Thomas, who'd sworn he'd never be tied down, who'd laughed at the very idea of settling down with one woman. Thomas, who'd run from responsibility his entire life. When? The word came out rougher than he'd intended. 6 weeks ago, in the little chapel in Tucson, she pulled something from her pocket, a simple gold band that caught the dying sunlight. He said we had to keep it secret, said there were people who wouldn't understand, people who might hurt me if they knew. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach. What people? But before she could answer, the sound came. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching fast. Elena's face went white as desert bone. "They found us," she whispered. "Oh God, they found us." Who found us? But she was already moving, pressing herself tighter against the wall, her eyes wild with fear. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Samuel could make out at least 4 horses, maybe more, their riders pushing hard across the canyon floor. "Elena?" He grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Who's coming?" She looked at him with eyes full of desperate hope and terrible knowledge. "My brothers." The riders appeared as black silhouettes against the dying sun. 4 men on horseback moving with the grim purpose of a funeral procession. Samuel recognized the way they rode, not the casual gait of cowboys or the efficient pace of lawmen, but the predatory approach of men who'd come to settle a blood debt. Elena pressed herself against the cabin wall, as if she could disappear into the weathered wood. Her breathing came quick and shallow, and Samuel could see the pulse jumping in her throat like a caged bird. "They think I was taken," she whispered, her words barely audible above the approaching hoofbeats. "They think Thomas stole me away. My father, he'd already arranged a marriage, to Eduardo Herrera, the cattle baron's son. The dowry was agreed upon, the church reserved." Samuel kept his eyes on the approaching riders while his mind raced. He'd heard of Eduardo Herrera, a man who collected beautiful things the way other men collected cattle or land, keeping them locked away where only he could admire them. The kind of man who would see a woman's refusal as theft of his property. "And you chose Thomas instead." "I chose? See love," she said simply. "Is that so wrong?" The lead rider was close enough now that Samuel could make out his face, lean and sharp as a hawk's, with eyes that burned like coals in a forge. Miguel Vasquez, Elena's eldest brother, known throughout the territory as a man who believed honor was worth more than blood. Behind him rode 3 others, all bearing the same aquiline features, all armed with the casual competence of men who'd grown up settling disputes with steel. "Samuel," Elena's voice was urgent now, "you have to understand. They're not evil men. They're my brothers and they love me. But they've been raised to believe that family honor is everything, that a woman who runs away brings shame on everyone who shares her name. And Thomas?" Her face crumpled slightly. "They think he's a gringo who seduced their innocent sister and stole her away in the night. They don't know—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Don't know what?" "Don't know that I was the one who proposed." The riders were 50 yards away now, close enough that Samuel could see the dust coating their horses' flanks and the grim set of their mouths. Miguel raised his hand, and the group slowed to a walk, then stopped 20 yards from the cabin. "Elena!" Miguel's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Come out! We've come to take you home." Samuel felt Elena's hand touch his arm, light as a bird's wing. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them hurt him. Whatever Thomas has done, whatever mistakes he's made, he's a good man. He married me in the church before God. That has to count for something." Miguel dismounted, his spurs ringing against the hard ground. He was a big man, Samuel realized, with the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who'd built his life with sweat and determination. The kind of man Samuel might have respected under different circumstances. "Señor Creek." Miguel's English was precise, formal. "I know who you are. Your reputation precedes you. This is not your fight." Samuel stepped away from the wall, positioning himself between the brothers and the cabin door. "Maybe not, but she asked me not to let you hurt him." "Him?" Miguel's laugh was bitter as alkali water. "The coward who hides behind a woman's skirts, who steals away an innocent girl in the night like a common thief? She says they're married. A marriage built on lies and theft is no marriage at all." Miguel's hand rested casually on his gun butt. "She was promised to another, the dowry paid, the contract signed. Her honor, our family's honor, demands she return." Samuel could feel the weight of the moment, the terrible mathematics of violence. 4 armed men against 1, with Elena caught in the middle and Thomas, wherever he was, apparently unwilling or unable to face what was coming. "Let me talk to him," Samuel said finally. "Let me bring him out. Man to man, we can settle this." Miguel considered this, his dark eyes moving from Samuel to the cabin door and back again. 5 minutes, he said at last. "Then we take our sister home, and we settle accounts with the man who dishonored her." Samuel nodded and turned toward the door. Elena's hand caught his sleeve. "Don't open that door," she whispered again, but this time there was something different in her voice. Not fear, but desperate pleading. "Please, once you see what's inside, you can't unsee it, and everything changes." But Samuel was already reaching for the latch, driven by duty and love and the stubborn loyalty that had defined his relationship with his brother for 34 years. The iron was cold under his fingers, and as he lifted it, Elena's whispered words followed him like a prayer or a curse. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The door swung open on darkness and the smell of meat, hing that made Samuel's stomach clench. And there, in the dim light filtering through the windows, he saw Thomas. His brother sat in a chair beside the cold fireplace, his head tilted at an angle that spoke of peaceful sleep, or something else entirely. His eyes were closed, his hands folded in his lap, and across his chest, like a crimson sash, was a stain that had long since dried to the color of rust. Samuel heard Elena's sharp intake of breath behind him, heard Miguel's boots on the threshold, heard the world shift and crack like ice breaking on a winter pond. And in that moment, everything changed. The silence in the cabin was thick as wool, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the canyon walls and Miguel's sharp intake of breath. Samuel stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were telling him. Thomas sat motionless in the chair, peaceful as a man taking an afternoon nap, except for the dark stain across his chest and the flies that had begun to gather around the edges of the wound. "Dios mío," Miguel whispered, crossing himself. His brothers crowded behind him, their earlier anger replaced by something closer to reverence in the presence of death. Samuel forced himself to move forward, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Up close, he could see that Thomas had been shot once, clean through the heart. No struggle, no signs of a fight, just one precise shot from someone who knew how to use a gun. "How long?" Samuel's voice came out as a croak. Elena stepped into the doorway, her face pale but composed. 3 days. 3 days. Samuel turned to look at her, and suddenly pieces began falling into place. The telegram was dated 4 days ago. She nodded, her hands clasped in front of her like a penitent in church. "I sent it. I knew his handwriting from the letters he wrote me. I practiced until I could copy it perfectly." Miguel moved to stand beside Samuel, his earlier hostility replaced by confusion and something that might have been respect for the dead. "Elena, what happened here?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Thomas's still form. When she spoke, her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, as if she were recounting a trip to the market rather than a killing. "He tried to force himself on me, on our wedding night." She looked up at Samuel, and he saw no shame in her eyes, only a terrible, quiet strength. "He said that marriage gave him the right, that I belonged to him now, like his horse or his saddle. When I said no, he became angry, violent." Samuel felt something cold settle in his chest. This was the Thomas he'd tried so hard not to see, the Thomas who had always taken what he wanted without considering the cost to others. "So, you shot him." "I defended myself." Her voice remained steady. "The gun was on the table. He'd been cleaning it earlier, showing off, talking about how he'd use it on any man who tried to take me away from him. When he grabbed me, when he tore my dress..." She touched the mended places in the calico fabric. "I reached for it. He tried to stop me. It went off." Miguel's face was unreadable. "And then?" "I buried him in the old cemetery behind the chapel in Tucson. I told the priest he had died of fever. Then I came here to think, to decide what to do next." She looked at Samuel with something that might have been hope. "I knew you'd come if you thought Thomas was in trouble. I thought maybe you could help me figure out how to make this right." One of Miguel's brothers, Carlos, Samuel thought, spoke up from the doorway. "She's lying. She killed her husband and made up this story to save herself." "No." The voice came from outside, old and cracked as dried leather. They turned to see an elderly Apache woman standing in the yard, her face seamed with years and weather, her eyes bright as polished obsidian. She wore traditional dress but carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen much and judged carefully. "Grandmother Singing Bird," Elena said softly. "I didn't know you were still here." The old woman approached the cabin with slow, careful steps. "I never left. I've been watching over you, child, watching and listening." She looked at Miguel with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Your sister speaks truth. I saw the man strike her, saw her fight him off, saw her weep over his body afterward, though he deserved no tears." Miguel studied the old woman's face, weighing her words against his own assumptions. In the end, it was the quiet dignity in Elena's posture that seemed to convince him. "If this is true," he said slowly, "if he forced himself on you, then she did what any woman has the right to do," Samuel finished. The words came out harder than he'd intended, heavy with years of making excuses for Thomas, of cleaning up his messes, of hoping he'd change. She defended herself. The cabin fell silent again, each person lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the canyon walls the color of dried blood. Samuel looked at his brother's body and felt not grief, exactly, but a kind of tired sadness for all the chances Thomas had wasted, all the people he'd hurt, all the ways he'd failed to be the man he could have been. "What happens now?" Elena asked quietly. Miguel removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "Now we take you home. You're still our sister, no matter what happened here. The family will protect you. And Eduardo Herrera? We'll be told the truth, that you were widowed tragically, and the marriage contract is void." Miguel's smile was grim. "I don't think he'll argue the point." Elena looked at Samuel, her eyes searching his face. "And you? Can you forgive me for what I did to your brother?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about forgiveness and justice, about the difference between the brother he'd loved and the man Thomas had actually been. In the end, the answer came easier than he'd expected. "There's nothing to forgive," he said simply. "You did what you had to do." As if summoned by his words, Grandmother Singing Bird stepped forward, her weathered hands reaching out to touch Elena's face with infinite gentleness. "The spirits are quiet now," she said, her voice soft as wind through sage. "The wrong has been balanced. You are free." The funeral was held at sunset 3 days later, in the small cemetery behind the Mission Church in Tucson. Samuel had arranged for Thomas to be buried properly, with a headstone that bore his name and dates, but made no mention of how he'd died. The priest, Father Martinez, had asked no questions when Elena explained that she was the widow and Samuel the brother, accepting their story with the practiced discretion of a man who'd seen too much of human nature to be easily shocked. Elena stood between Samuel and Miguel at the graveside, her black dress borrowed from one of the Mexican women in town, her face composed but not unmoved. Samuel found himself watching her more than listening to the priest's words, trying to understand the quiet strength that radiated from her like heat from a banked fire. She'd refused Miguel's offer to return home immediately, insisting instead on staying long enough to see Thomas properly buried. "He was my husband," she'd said simply. "Whatever else he was, whatever he did, he deserves that much respect." The priest finished his prayers, made the sign of the cross, and stepped back. One by one, the small group of mourners dropped handfuls of earth onto the coffin. When Elena's turn came, she knelt and whispered something too soft for the others to hear before letting the dirt fall through her fingers. Afterward, as the others drifted away, Samuel found himself alone with her beside the grave. The desert air was cooling rapidly with the setting sun, and somewhere in the distance a coyote raised its voice in a lonely song. "What will you do now?" he asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the simple wooden cross that marked Thomas's resting place. "Miguel wants me to come home, says the family will take care of me, find me another husband when enough time has passed." "But?" She smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, it reached her eyes. "But I've tasted freedom, Samuel Creek. I've made my own choices, paid my own prices. I don't think I can go back to being the obedient daughter, waiting for someone else to decide my fate. What's the alternative? There's a woman in Phoenix who runs a boarding house. She wrote to me through the priest, said she could use help managing the place. It's honest work, and it would be mine." Samuel nodded slowly. He'd heard of such arrangements, women who had found ways to make their own living, to build lives independent of fathers and husbands. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always accepted, but it was possible. "And you're not afraid?" "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh that held more hope than fear. "But I'd rather be terrified and free than safe and caged." They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Thomas left some money behind, not much, but enough to get you started." He held it out to her. "He owed you that much at least." Elena looked at that bound pouch for a long moment before taking it. "Thank you. For understanding. For not hating me." "For not hating you?" Samuel shook his head. "Elena, you saved yourself from a man who would have destroyed you. If anything, I'm grateful. Grateful that you were strong enough to do what I never could." "What do you mean?" Samuel looked down at his brother's grave, thinking about all the times he'd made excuses, all the messes he'd cleaned up, all the warnings he'd ignored because blood was supposed to be thicker than water. "I spent 34 years trying to save Thomas from himself. Maybe if I'd stopped sooner, if I'd let him face the consequences of his actions," he shrugged, "maybe he would have learned to be a better man. Or maybe not, but you don't have to carry the weight of what he chose to become. Elena reached out and touched his arm gently. You're a good man, Samuel Creek. Don't let your brother's failures make you forget that. As if summoned by her words, Miguel appeared at the edge of the cemetery, his brothers behind him. They'd been respectfully waiting, Samuel realized, giving Elena the time she needed to say goodbye. Elena, Miguel called softly. It's time. She nodded and turned back to Samuel one last time. Will you be all right? Samuel looked at her, this young woman who'd faced an impossible situation, with courage and determination, who'd defended herself when no one else would, who'd taken responsibility for her actions and moved forward with her life, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite peace, but something close to it. I will, he said, and meant it. Will you? Elena smiled and reached up to kiss his cheek, soft as a blessing. Ask me in a year. She walked away then, her spine straight and her head held high, flanked by her brothers but moving under her own power. Samuel watched until they disappeared into the gathering darkness, then turned back to Thomas's grave one last time. Goodbye, brother, he said quietly. I hope you find whatever peace you couldn't find in life. 1 year later, Samuel Creek rode into Phoenix on a hot Tuesday morning in late September, the dust from the trail coating his clothes and the taste of alkali water sharp on his tongue. He'd been working a ranch outside Flagstaff, honest work that paid decent wages and asked no questions about a man's past. But he had found himself thinking about Elena Vasquez more often than he cared to admit, wondering if she'd made good on her promise to build a life on her own terms. The boarding house wasn't hard to find, a 2-story adobe building on the respectable end of Main Street with clean windows and a sign that read, Mrs. Patterson's Rooms for Gentlemen. Samuel tied his horse to the hitching post and climbed the front steps, suddenly uncertain about what he was doing there. The door opened before he could knock, and Elena stood framed. In the doorway, older somehow, but not worn down. She'd put on weight in the healthy way of someone who ate regular meals and slept soundly at night. Her hair was pinned up in a practical style, and she wore a simple brown dress with a white apron, the uniform of a working woman. Samuel, she said, and her smile was like sunrise over the desert. I wondered when you'd come. How did you... Mrs. Patterson has a view of the whole street from her window upstairs. She saw you coming and recognized the way you sit a horse. Elena stepped back, gesturing him inside. She's very observant, Mrs. Patterson. Comes from years of running a boarding house, I suppose. The interior was clean and comfortable, with sturdy furniture and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Through an open doorway, Samuel could see a dining room where several men sat reading newspapers and drinking coffee. You asked me to ask you in a year, he said without preamble. I did. Elena studied his face with those storm gray eyes. Are you asking? I am. She was quiet for a moment, and Samuel found himself holding his breath. I'm well, she said finally. Better than well. Mrs. Patterson is teaching me to keep books, and I've been learning to read English better. Next month, she's going to make me a partner in the business. And are you happy? Elena considered this seriously, the way she seemed to consider everything. Happy might be too strong a word. Content, maybe. Satisfied with my choices. I wake up each morning knowing that the day belongs to me, that whatever happens is my responsibility, my decision. That's worth more than happiness, I think. They stood looking at each other across the space of a year and all the things that had changed in it. Finally, Samuel nodded. I'm glad. What about you? Are you well? Samuel thought about the ranch outside Flagstaff, about the simple satisfaction of honest work and peaceful nights, about how he had stopped looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next telegram from Thomas, the next crisis to solve. I am, he said, and realized. And he meant it. Elena smiled and reached out to touch his arm, the same gentle gesture she'd made beside Thomas's grave. Would you like some coffee? Mrs. Patterson makes the best in Phoenix, and I think she'd like to meet the man who helped me find my courage. I didn't help you find anything, Samuel said. You already had it. Maybe, but you saw it when I needed someone to see it. That matters more than you know. Samuel looked at this remarkable woman who'd survived the worst kind of betrayal and built something new from the ashes, and felt something shift in his chest, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening. Coffee sounds good, he said. Elena led him toward the kitchen, and Samuel followed, thinking about second chances and new beginnings, about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher into the endless blue sky, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Not mournful, but clear and bright as a promise. As they passed through the dining room, one of the boarders looked up from his newspaper and nodded respectfully to Elena. "Morning, Mrs. Vasquez. That coffee smells mighty fine." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I'll bring you a fresh cup in just a moment." Samuel noticed how she moved through the room with quiet confidence, how the men treated her with genuine respect rather than the careful deference usually shown to women in positions of service. She'd earned her place here through competence and character, and it showed in every interaction. In the kitchen, Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a woman of perhaps 60, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. She welcomed Samuel with the practiced hospitality of someone who'd spent decades judging character quickly and accurately. "So, you're Elena's friend from Arizona," she said, pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs. "She's told me a good deal about you." "All of it bad, I'm sure," Samuel said with a slight smile. "On the contrary, she speaks of you as a man who showed kindness when it mattered most." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were shrewd but not unkind. "That's rarer than you might think, Mr. Creek." They sat around the kitchen table, the three of them, drinking coffee and talking about ordinary things: the weather, the growing business of the boarding house, the changes coming to Phoenix as more people moved west. Samuel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months, maybe years. Eventually, Mrs. Patterson excused herself to attend to our duties, leaving Samuel and Elena alone. The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen windows, warm and golden, and somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily. "I have a confession to make," Elena said, setting down her coffee cup. "Oh, I've been writing to your old foreman in Tombstone, Jim Hawkins. He told me where you were working." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Planning to have me watched, Mrs. Vasquez?" "Planning to make sure you were taking care of yourself. Someone should, and it seemed like you'd forgotten how." There was something in her tone that made Samuel look at her more carefully. "Elena, I know what you're thinking," she said quickly, "that it's too soon, or inappropriate, or that people will talk. And maybe you're right. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and good people are rarer than gold." Samuel felt his heart speed up. "What are you saying?" Elena met his eyes steadily. "I'm saying that if you ever get tired of working other people's ranches, there's a place for you here. Mrs. Patterson has been talking about expanding, maybe buying the property next door. She could use a man's help with the heavier work, someone she can trust. And you? What would you need?" Elena's smile was soft but sure. "A partner, in all things, if you're willing. Someone who sees me as I am, not as what I was or what I might become. Someone who understands that love isn't about ownership, but about choosing each other every day." Samuel looked at this extraordinary woman who'd traveled such a difficult road to reach this moment, and felt something he'd never experienced before. Not the desperate need that had driven so many of his decisions, but a quiet certainty that felt like coming home. "When would you want an answer?" Elena laughed, and the sound was like water over stones, clear and clean and beautiful. "When you're ready to give one. I'm no going anywhere. Samuel Creek. I've found my place in the world, and I'm not afraid to wait for the right person to share it with." Outside, the church bell tolled again, marking another hour past, another step forward into whatever came next. Samuel reached across the table and took Elena's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and the strength that had carried her through the darkest of times. "I don't need time to think about it," he said. The answer is yes. Elena's smile could have lit up the whole territory. "Then welcome home," she said. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Creek knew exactly what that word meant.